Welcome. How's everyone doing today? We're going to have 4 speakers on 3 different topics. Hidden in plain sight, we're going to talk about how to discover the various things going on across the campuses, more than just storage, support for open scholarship through campus collaborations, and then a funder's perspective. I think today we will start with Juanita Gomez from UC Santa Cruz. Juanita is a PhD candidate in computer science whose work focuses on the security and sustainability of scientific open source software. She's contributed to major open source communities, including Spider, Scientific Python, SciPy, PyCon US, and NumFocus. She'll open our session today by showing what is hidden in plain sight across the UC, the people, projects, and patterns that make up UC's open source landscape, and how the UC open source repository browser is helping make that work easier to find, understand, and support. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. So the title of my talk today is Hidden in Plain Sight, Discovering the University of California Open Source Landscape. So a little bit about me. I'm originally from Colombia, and I came here for my PhD at UC Santa Cruz, mostly in open source sustainability and security. I have experience as a maintainer of an open source project, Spider, which is an IDE for Python. And I have also been involved with the Python community. So I'm right now the security track chair at PyCon US and also the communications chair at SciPy conference. So you want to learn more about those, hit me up after the talk. And these are some ways that you can find me online. So what is the open source repository browser? It is a work in progress. So just mind that. But it's an open source tool that maps and classifies open source project activity. Initially within the UC system, but we have expanded it to a lot more universities across the world, actually. So why does it matter? We're hoping that this tool will help universities with the visibility and impact, so help them figure out who's there and also showcase the projects that are doing open source, and also communicate impact to institutions. Also figure out gaps for targeted OSPO support. So we've heard a lot about OSPOs and how great they are. But one of the main goals of the repository browser is to figure out how can they help and who can they help. And the third is sustainability. I care deeply about sustainability. And one of the things that I'm trying to do with the open source repository browser is figure out how can we help with sustainability gaps, improve some of the open source practices, and of course, security. So I'm just going to share very quickly how I developed this tool, because I think the fun part of it is to show you the tool. But briefly, I collected data from GitHub using GitHub's API. I basically did regex matching. So what that means is I took a bunch of keywords from all the universities that I cared about. I put them in queries, and I used GitHub's REST API to search for all of those queries within like all the GitHub database. This is only for GitHub right now, but there's no reason why it can't be applied to like any other version control browser. So basically, I did searches on the repository, the organization, and the user fields for all of these queries. I collected some extra metadata, like the READMEs, the code of conduct, contributing guides, some of these things that in my opinion, are very important for sustainability. And also some like indicators of engagement, like release download subscribers, fork stars, some of these things. The output of this was a bunch of attributes with a bunch of repositories in a huge database. I also collected a bunch of information from contributors from these repositories and organizations. So as you know, in GitHub, the repositories can be owned either by a user or by organization. And I think the fact that repositories are owned by organizations is actually a clear indicator if the organization is associated with a university. This is one of the clearest indicators for like ownership. So after collecting data, I'm going to tell you data from the UC system because this is originally how this started, but now there's a lot more data. I collected 236,000 repositories from the UC system, and I say the UC system because this is actually not true. There's a lot of noise out there, and I'm going to tell you in a bit how I filtered out that noise. And 6,000 organizations, which is really cool because these organizations, some of them are actually affiliated with the University of California system. So now we have a way not only to see the projects, but to contact information that are doing actually this work. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of noise within this database. So I actually had to filter out some of the repositories that are not affiliated with the university system. And some examples of things that I had to filter out are, for example, the compilation of universities that have computer science programs. There's a lot of like repositories in GitHub that have, they mention the University of California, Berkeley a million times because they have computer science programs or they have other stuff. There's also funny stories about like universities that have exactly the same acronyms, UC Santa Cruz, UCSC. There's two other universities, one in Spain, one in Singapore, that have exactly the same acronyms. So that was also some noise that I had to filter out. And the way I did that, well, LLMs, of course, because now LLMs are great for everything. But the reason I have these plots here is to show you that I did not only try LLMs, I tried 3 different methods of doing this. The first one was a score-based classifier, and sadly, that was actually the worst performing method. And the reason it's because context matters. So it's not only the keyword matchings that matter, but also the way in which a university like keyword is mentioned in a README or description or any of the fields that I'm looking at. I also tried a combination of embeddings and machine learning. If you're not familiar with embeddings, basically imagine turning a big chunk of text into numbers and running machine learning on that and getting predictions out of that. I also try that. It is fairly accurate, but not as good as LLMs. I tried different language models, all from OpenAI. And I'm showing you this just to show you that GPT-5 Mini was the one that was the best for, in this case, 3 different universities that I made tests with. And of course, there's trade-offs of accuracy, time, and money. Of course, LLMs are not cheap. So just showing you there's different ways of doing it, but depending on what you want to prioritize, you can do either way. There's a lot more information about this in my paper, which I will share at the end. But this is just like a summary of all the things that I tried. So this is specifically about the LLMs method, which is the one that I went with in the end. What I did was basically passing the LLM university information, a definition of what actually means to be affiliated or associated with a university, and the repository information. So things like the README, the description, the organization, the contributing details. And I built a prompt that says, basically, given all of this, can you just tell me a probability of whether this repository is associated or not with this university? I did this for affiliation, and I also did this for project type. So trying to figure out what are the different types of projects that people are doing. Is it an education project, as in like a repository that's been done for a class or a syllabus? Or is it actually like a development project? Like, is it a tool that it's been built? Or is it a website? Or is it a data set? So the prompt for the project type is fairly similar, except that in this case, the definition contains actually the definition of all of these project types with examples or clear indicators of what it means to be each of these project types. And what I got at the end was that almost like more than half of it was noise. I only kept 47% of the data based on doing these predictions. And you could see, depending on the university, there's more or less noise. For example, UCM, UC Merced has a lot of noise. My guess, it's because the acronym, it probably means a million things. There's other universities where there's much less noise, UCSF, for example. But in general, the affiliation step is very important because there's a lot of noise out there if you try to just compile the keywords, the keyword search. In terms of project distribution, I actually found that the main, I guess, category types for the projects in the UC system are development projects, so tools or like research development, or education, so things that are class materials or homeworks or things like that that students just put in GitHub. Something interesting about my findings is that UCSF, for example, has percentages that are very different from all the other universities, and that actually matches the fact that UCSF is only like a graduate student, like a graduate school. So most students are either masters or PhD students that are doing research. So there's not a lot of like class materials or things like that. So it's kind of like a sanity check for me to see that the distribution kind of matches the nature of the university. There is a lot less data on, a lot less project types on docs, web, or data. But in general, most of the universities are doing div or education materials. Some insights on, for example, license and language distribution. So in terms of language distribution, we can see that Python is definitely the most popular language. If you look a little bit deeper into the project type and the language relationship, Jupyter Notebooks is actually the most popular within the education space, which actually makes sense. A lot of professors use Jupyter Notebooks to teach their classes. And there's other less popular languages, JavaScript, HTML, C++, Java, etc. In terms of license distribution, one of the most interesting findings is that a lot of repositories, 77.5%, don't have a license reported, which is sad, right? However, I say use this with caution. My data is based on what the GitHub's REST API is able to grab. So some of the repositories might have a license in the README or somewhere else that it's just really hard to find, which is also a problem. You want your license to be really easy to grab computationally and also by a human. But in general, what I grab is like almost 80% of projects have no license reported. And of course, a lot of these projects are not meant to be open source development tools. Some of them are just homeworks that people put in GitHub, and that's perfectly fine. But 80% sounds like a lot. The most popular license within the University of California system is MIT, which with 12%. And then if you see the next bar is actually other. And what I did was basically I compiled all the licenses that have percentages less than 1% in other, and I put them all there. And I think that talks about like the diversity of the licenses within the UC system. So in terms of community practices, which I call sustainability, because I think a project is more sustainable when it has good open source practices that are gonna help them engage better with the community. We see that README is a very popular thing to have in your repository. We're not that concerned about that. When we look about descriptions or licenses or contributing guides, we start getting more concerned in terms of like what people are doing. So I actually did an analysis in terms of the number of stars because I wanted to know, yeah, some of these projects are class projects. They don't need to have any of these things. They're just meant to be out there, right? For homeworks that my professor asked me to do. But looking at projects that have a lot more stars, we start thinking people are using it. They have some visibility within the community. So if we look at projects, for example, in the last bucket, more than 200 stars, we see that actually only 6% of them have a code of conduct. Only 13% of them had a contributing guide. And then don't even mention the security policy and the issue templates or the PR templates, right? So that seems like a concerning thing to think about. These projects already seem to have a community, at least in GitHub. They've been followed by a lot of people, and yet they're missing all of these key practices that are very important if you want your project to be sustainable long-term. So I took all of this data and I built a dashboard because having a CSV with a bunch of things is not as useful as like being able to see grouped data by university, by ecosystem, by anything that you want to figure out. Like what you care about. But I didn't do this only with the University of California system. I actually partnered with Curious, which was mentioned earlier. Curious is an organization that groups universities from the world that have open source program offices. And I've been kind of interacting with them to build this dashboard as useful as possible. So let me see if this works. Yay. Okay. So this is how the dashboard looks right now. And it basically has, in the side, in the left, it has manual filters. There is this slider here for the prediction threshold. And what I wanted to do with this is basically, as I told you, I used affiliation prediction using LLMs to figure out whether these projects belong or not. If you want to be more strict with your prediction threshold, be like, no, I want to be 100% sure, then you can increase that to 0.95 or something like that, correct? But basically, I want to give that flexibility of people determining whether false positives are important or not for them. I have filters per university. So there is in total 31 universities in Korea's right now, and I have data for all of these universities. If you care about only one university, you can just filter out, let's do Stanford, for example. And then all your data, it's going to update to Stanford. We have filters on the project type. We have license, language, and some of the impact indicators. This page just shows you an overview of some of the characteristics of the projects. I also have some like raw data if you want to just see a table of all of the projects from a specific university or all of them. You can actually click on them and then see other information from this specific university. It renders a community file, the README, the contributing file on the security policy if available, which as we saw, most of them don't have it. And then I have other tabs that show the impact. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but basically I'm collecting just raw impact indicators from GitHub right now. I'm hoping to make this better. Sustainability, things like the boss factor, the average number of contributors, the presence of community files. Oh, sorry about this blood. Need to fix that. And security. So this is a work in progress. This just started. I'm collecting metrics on security using open source scorecards by the Linux Foundation to get an idea on the security of these projects. That was my demo. I want to leave with this last slide that has a QR code to my archive paper where there's a lot of information about the data collection and classification, as I told you, and this short survey. So if this is something you care about, I would love your input. This just has 5 questions. It's really quick. It'll take you 2 minutes. So if you care about this work and you want to shape it somehow, I would really love your input on this short survey. Reach out if you have any other questions. And here are the links to the 2 repositories. They're online, they're open source. Thank you so much.
Next up, we're going to have Sam Teplitzky and Anna Sackmann from the UC Berkeley Library. Sam and Anna work at the center of Berkeley's open scholarship and research data support efforts. Sam is a Berkeley open source librarian with deep experience in open science data, reproducibility, and transparent research workflows. Anna leads the library's digital service program, including licensing data, supporting text data mining, and managing Dataverse, Berkeley's data publishing platform. They'll share how campus IT, research IT, and the library turned a storage gap into a coordinated service model that helps research outputs become easier to preserve, discover, and reuse.
We can dive in. I'm Anna. Okay, I'm going to back up just a little bit. So this is an overview on a big storage pilot that we're currently running at UC Berkeley and how we're weaving in open scholarship through campus collaborations. So the problem that we faced, along with many other institutions, perhaps your institutions, are the rising costs of cloud storage and ultimately the move away from cloud storage because of the strict limitations that are put on space. So we went from more or less unlimited cloud storage space through Box and Google Drive down to anywhere from 50 gigabytes to 150 gigabytes per account. So this was a big deal for campus a couple of years ago, and a lot of people had to move terabytes of data onto what they weren't sure, and there wasn't a campus solution that was provided for them. So this is a chunk of texts from a white paper written by one of my colleagues in research IT. But what the faculty member sees is this, like, your Google account is about to be frozen. You have to figure out where to put all of this data in a matter of weeks. I think ultimately we moved like petabytes of data. So the ask that we received, there was an academic Senate committee back in the spring of 2025, and they wrote a proposal, a request to campus, where they were asking for much more support around storage for research data on the UC Berkeley campus. They wanted overall increased storage. They wanted at least 5 terabytes to put us more in line with where our peers are. They wanted expandable storage, meaning that they could start with a chunk of storage and then if needed, they could get a greater allocation. They wanted a better solution for longer-term preservation of data sets, particularly data sets that needed to be preserved for federal grant requirements. And we've also never, as campus, really addressed the public interest or orphan data set issue. So we wanted more of a hierarchical ownership model that would transfer ownership to the library and the university for long-term stewardship of data sets. So the proposed solution that the library came up with along with campus IT and research IT were 5 different buckets of storage that we pulled together into one service area. We wanted something that was collaborative, easy file sharing with external collaborators and internal collaborators. Greater use of computational storage, so storage that was really close to the compute for researchers using large amounts of data. Secure storage, something that could work with data that was personally identifiable, had health information, anything that needed a stronger level of security. Along with that, more general purpose storage, anything that just general data sets could go into, media, maybe something that you're not currently working on, but you don't want to get rid of. And then they wanted something that would address data sharing and publishing, so public or mediated access to data sets. This is one of the kind of the visual tools that our great communications team at Campus IT came up with. This was a guide for finding a fit to where your data could go. Looking at when you should be using secure research data and compute or Savio or high performance computing on campus. Data publishing, anything citable with a DOI would go into Dataverse. When you would want to use Berkeley Box for collaboration, and really for anything else, using Cloudian for basically all of the other storage needs that you might need. So now I'm going to pass it over to Sam, who's going to get more in depth about why the library.
Thanks, Anna. We have a pretty library-friendly crowd, but if you're curious why the library would be part of this, for one, we had existing services, partially in the form of Anna and her team doing data management and helping people construct data management plans. We also do we do publishing through the library and archiving. Our colleague Erin is part of the research data management program that helps with, as the slide says, data management, storage, backup, and transfer. We also in library world, talk about something called the reference interview, which is our special power of being able to talk to people about anything, and it's particularly about things we know nothing about. And I think that became clear in the consultations we did, our ability to build rapport, to connect with people, to think kind of behind the ask and really figure out what's going on with their overall workflow and how these products and services fit, and to help people clarify their needs. We also come at this with a more holistic approach to the research lifecycle. So we wanted people to not be obsessed with or tied or like too concerned with the platform itself, but to think about the overall workflow and to be able to recognize their data management needs across the life cycle. Why are we here? What's the connection to the OSPO? I think two things stood out to me as we were prepping this. I think the first, breaking silos. Our pilot brings together developers from different parts of campus, library service providers, and faculty into a shared dialogue. And I think that that's kind of a common theme to what we've heard in the meeting so far. And we also have the strategic goal of using technical infrastructure to align with institutional policies, particularly those that favor open and transparent research practices. So you may be curious about the scale of this. These are our initial numbers, and the pilot is still ongoing. We started in, was it December or January? December. Great time to send out email. So we sent out 2750 email invitations to faculty. Those are people who have the status of being part of the Faculty Senate at Berkeley. And our response rate is about 8%, 244. And then this is the type of storage people have requested. I won't read out the numbers, but you can see how those fall. The most popular was collaborative storage. The real ask was people wanted more Google Drive, but in fact, we were offering them more Box and convincing them that that was also a good fit. And then sort of the numbers decrease in the other buckets. We fielded 155 consultation requests, which is quite a lot over a couple of months. The department breakdown has been really interesting. On the surface, it might seem a very science-y thing, and it's true that the top departments, in terms of number of faculty and the terabytes requested, are sort of science-weighted. You will see City and Regional Planning, the Haas Business School as well. But one of the interesting things is that our consultations were fairly different, much more evenly spread across. We had lots of consultations with social scientists, with folks in the humanities. So yeah, much more kind of equal distribution across the different disciplinary areas.
I want to highlight just a couple of consultations that we had. One of the first one was with a faculty member in linguistics who does research on Indigenous languages. And this person had a great system of storing data on their computer, backing it up to an external hard drive, and is really like an international expert in their field, like so many of these faculty members are. But they said, I don't know anything about storage. It is not my job to know about storage. This was the very first consultation, and that was a theme that resonated throughout. It is not their job to know about storage. And so they were really happy that there was someone there who they could actually have a conversation with about this. So we moved a lot of that data from an external drive sitting in an office to more centrally supported storage. One of the next ones was securing health data. This was a faculty member in public health. Some of the more complicated consultations came from public health and social welfare. And they were getting cancer registry data from a state agency. And this comes along with a very specific data use agreement about where it can be worked on, where it can be stored. And we were able to identify secure research data compute platform where they could both store and work with the data in a very secure environment. And then the third example here, this actually happened a couple of times. It was a faculty member in economics, and they were paying a lot for computational storage with AWS, and we were able to get some of their projects moved to campus-provided computing infrastructure, which is at no cost to them. So we were able to reduce their costs significantly. And these are just three examples. I do want to talk a little bit more about the role that Dataverse is playing in this, because Dataverse is open source. And it's really positioned as the solution here for data publishing on campus that meets the kind of the FAIR principles and funder mandates. We had more requests for Dataverse than I thought we would. Overall, about 189 terabytes of storage have been requested in Dataverse. And the top departments kind of echoed one of the earlier slides that Sam went over, coming from molecular and cell biology, neuroscience, integrative biology, business, and chemistry. I meant to skip this slide. This was our first data set that made it into Dataverse. A couple of the use cases that we see with Dataverse, we are hoping that we can transition faculty away from self-hosting data to something that's more sustainable, more centrally located. We don't want them putting data on their own personal websites that could be lost at any time. And we want them to have a good solution, a variety of solutions, because we're also members of Dryad and Qualitative Data Repository that will meet their funder requirements. We want to incentivize reproducibility. We want to ensure that these researchers can receive academic credit. They can see their downloads, the number of times their data set has been cited. And as I mentioned just a couple seconds ago, this complements other existing repository offerings that we have. We are members of Dryad, we are members of Qualitative Data Repository and ICPSR out of the University of Michigan. So this isn't just like the one option that they have on campus. And a couple of brief technical details. We did a really thorough review of what our different repository options could be at UC Berkeley. We had a whole matrix that I would be happy to share with all of you. And we landed on Dataverse largely because of how robustly open source it is and how supportive the community is. There were a lot of potential opportunities for our UC staff, the developers in the library, to contribute back to the Dataverse community, either through the monthly meetings or through the annual conference. We have small contributions to date that will grow in the coming years. And it's also a shared practice to be using open source Dataverse. We're now more aligned with the UCLA library, hopefully the UC Santa Barbara library, woo. And some of our other peer institutions who are really heavily utilizing Dataverse.
We'll just finish up by talking a little bit about the feedback. We've had some positive feedback. Can't really read that first quote aloud, but some real enthusiastic folks who are like, this came at the right moment. This is amazing. The second one as well, someone who wanted to, figure out how to do all of this, but just like hasn't been able to invest the time, and the email kind of prompted them to work on this. And then a fair amount of skepticism. So there's still a gap. There's ongoing challenges between the storage we're offering and its usability. We have 5 services. It can be complicated for people to understand how they nest together. So there's that patchwork across the different platforms and services. And then there's volume. I got one email from someone who's like, well, I produce hundreds of terabytes per day. But in fact, the majority of people don't across the university. So that's like a problem we're probably just not going to solve. But other people are more appreciative. And then lastly, there are some people who feel burned by past efforts where the university overpromised and, under-delivered in the long term. Scaling, and I think this is something folks in the room who are interested could take home. If you are planning something similar, we had a fairly small uptake, which in a way is good. It was manageable for us all on the team to deal with this. So if you expect a similar response rate, that could be good news. There are definitely a lot of use cases that are not well represented, and we don't know how, what the other 90% are thinking. Are they not looking at their email, or are we not, covering what they need? There's some scaling support that we'll need to deal with because we did have a really high request for consultation. So there's a gap between what we're offering and people's ability to just immediately ramp up and get going. And then, as you saw, really variable response from different departments, these high demand power users, and then departments with lower uptake. So to finish off what we're doing next, we've had some office hours, lightly attended, but very focused attendees. And we have one more session of those. We have a new colleague coming on board, a research data curator who will help with Dataverse starting next month. And then we ultimately just need to transition this into a pilot sustainable service. And with that, we want to thank our team in the library listed here. And yeah, thanks for having us present.
Next up, we have Alden Connor from the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. Alden is a science officer on the R&D data infrastructure team, focused on making data sharing part of the research process from the start. Alden's background includes open source and open science work at the Alan Turing Institute, CZI, and CNOM, where she supported AI, data science, and computational biology teams. Alden will bring a funder's perspective on how clear expectations, dedicated support, and public discovery tools can help move open practices from good intentions to real adoption.
Hi, everyone. So pivoting a little bit, but there are, of course, a lot of common threads, and we are all here because we are enabling impact across California, right? So I am here from the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. I know most of you probably haven't heard of us, but we are a state agency And we fund research in stem cell biology and gene therapy medicine. So we were actually established by proposition in 2004. And we've been around for a little over 20 years. And I'm fairly new to the team, but more recently in the last few years, they've been working on a data sharing and management plan. So I'm going to tell you about that and how we implement it. I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. I actually am a biologist trained right here across the street at UC Berkeley. I was laughing when you popped up MCB as the top data generator because I am guilty. There may be data sitting on a hard drive over there on the shelf. And then after grad school, I left the bench. I worked a bit in industry and then kind of came back into this academic adjacent world. Got into open science, actually worked for Kirsty at the Turing Institute in London, and then found this role at CIRM. So I'm going to tell you a bit about CIRM. Our mission is to accelerate world-class science and deliver transformative regenerative medicine treatments in an equitable manner to a diverse California and the world. And what I really love about this statement is that I see fair data in every part of this. So how does fair data fit in with what CIRM does? Accelerating world-class science, you have to reuse data, you have to be reproducible. That's how we do world-class science. We really can't, I don't think I need to convince this room how important that is. And of course, it saves time and money. And as a funder, that's something we're very concerned with. If you want transformative treatments, you have to use the data that's out there. And today, as we just heard about, we're generating so much data, a lot of that coming from the biological sciences, these huge volumes. And so in order to enable transformative treatments, we really need to be working at the cutting edge of how we work with this data. And then, of course, equitable. So open science practices democratize access to data. Again, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but I just really love looking at our mission statement and thinking, every aspect of this requires fair data. And that's why what we're doing is so important. And so in order to do that, we have our R&D data infrastructure team. I just joined at the beginning of the year. And our goal is to maximize the value of CIRM-funded data. And like I described before, that really just involves making the data fair. And I'm going to talk about kind of two different aspects of this. I mean, it's all one and the same, but we have our data sharing and management plan, which is a process that our grantees go through in order to make their data available. And then we have the platform, which is the CIRM Data Explorer, which is both the platform where they complete their data sharing management plan and a platform that is publicly available for people to search for data. So I'll start with really kind of walking through the data sharing and management plan, and then I'll show you the platform at the end. So if you're a grantee or if you want to know more, anyone, this is our snazzy new webpage that we have that really details all of this. So I just wanted to put that up there. If you want to go poke around, that really shows, it has all the policies, everything our grantees have to follow, as well as a link to the Data Explorer. But if you're a grantee, what does this look like? What we're really trying to promote here is that awardees are considering data management starting on day one. A bit going back to what the previous speakers were saying about the library, it's something a lot of academics maybe are catching up on, they haven't thought about, and I think the number of consultations you're seeing really goes to show that, how difficult this is. And so we want to build it in from the beginning and make sure, you haven't even necessarily captured any data yet, but we want you to have a plan for how you're going to do that in a way that makes it easy to share. And so our online process captures metadata about data that probably hasn't been generated yet. So we want to know what kind of biological samples you're using, what kind of data analysis pipelines you're using, and hopefully where you'll share them, and what data repositories you plan to put your data in. And that's crucial because we are not a data repository. We do not want to hold anyone's data. We are an agency with maybe a runway of, it's unknown what'll happen with our funding. So we're like, go to the NIH, go to the big players who have these huge national data repositories, have really, good tech and good standards, and we want you to put your data there and make it findable. And then we do have to do this data use limitations institutional certification. So that's really specific to working with human samples, human cells, and human derived cell lines. And that just requires the grantees as well as their institutions to understand and certify, what if there are any limitations on this data. And for instance, if they come back to us and they say, I want to use the cell line that is only, basically, usually these limitations come in the consent form. So if you're a person signing up for a trial, you sign a consent form and it might say, my data can only be used for XYZ. And if a grantee comes to us and says, I want to use a cell line that can only be used in certain circumstances, we might say, can you change to a cell line that's more widely available to share the data? It's not common, but it's a good step in the process to really make sure that this is understood from the beginning, because we don't want to end up in a situation where they say, oh no, we can't share this because of the consent limitations. So what does this actually look like if you're an awardee? So in the application stage, you are expected to write a data sharing overview. So that's a narrative, a one-page detailing what kind of data you're going to generate and how you're going to make it available. And these really do, you can kind of tell who's already got a good infrastructure in their lab, who's already, dealt with this stuff, because they write it all out. Oh, I've got this repository and this repository. And some people are like, oh yeah, we'll share it. So it's a good thing to at least make sure they're thinking about it. In the just-in-time process, which is in between when they've been notified of the award and when the award actually starts, they're going to complete what we call the initial data sharing and management plan. That's in our Data Explorer. And that basically involves a certain subset of metadata that they have to input. And so we just, mark that as required at just in time. And again, that's just to make them be thinking ahead and planning. They complete a questionnaire that just gives us some more information, for instance, about, analytic pipelines and things like that. Like I said, the DUL institutional certification is that certificate regarding how they're handling that human data generated from human cell lines. And then, like I said, our metadata catalog. So they're putting in certain bits of metadata that we expect to know upfront. And then over the course of the award, they are expected within their progress reports to report on data sharing. And we understand that it might not happen right at the beginning, but it is actually included in their award as one of the milestones. So there will be scientific milestones that they want to reach during their award. But we also want data sharing itself to be a milestone that at the end you're going to check off and say, I shared my data. And this looks, you don't have to read in detail all of this, but it does look different for the different kind of awards, because we have discovery awards. So that's really basic biology, the kind of stuff they're doing here at Berkeley. We have preclinical development awards, and that's more where you maybe have a drug candidate that you're getting closer and closer to putting in humans. And then we have clinical development, and that's, actual clinical trials in humans. And so the requirements can look a little different. And but it really, it all goes to the same goal, which is to make sure that the data is ready to be shared. And so how do we do that? It's through this CIRM Data Explorer. So like I said, this is our platform both for the grantees to input the information we're asking for, so that metadata, ahead of the award as well as during the award. We want them to, we have them log in here, and we have all the fields, and they have to fill out what we're looking for. As I've said many times, this is really about setting up the project so that at the end, you don't have to go back and do all this work. And the flip side of the Data Explorer is that it is a public-facing dashboard. So, grantees have a login and they go in and they enter data, but anyone can actually visit the website and see. So this is a preview actually of our new version of the UI. We work with a really great contractor called Rancho Biosciences, and they've developed this website for us. And so when our new version is live, you'll see that along the left, you can search, you can really filter by a lot of different categories, maybe the source of the cells, the type of data they've generated, really anything. There are a lot of categories. So you could, if you're specifically looking for a certain data set, this is a great place to say, okay, I need a data set with these qualities. And then what you'll get is basically this kind of project view, and then the data sets within it are going to show up individually and where they are deposited. So ideally, this is a place where anyone, whether you're looking to take some data, try to reproduce a result, or add it to your own data set to do another experiment, another analysis, you could go in here and really dig down into what's available. And again, we're just trying to maximize the data that the California taxpayers have paid for, and we want to make sure that it's out there and available. And that's my last slide. So this QR code, I think, will take you to our data sharing and management page if you're interested in poking around, and CIRM.ca.gov is our website. And thanks for your time.
Like to invite our panelists to come back up. Do a little Q&A. They're doing that. I'll get up the information about our next session. Okay. I know, usually when we do these, I would ask the panel a bunch of questions. So, yeah, but we're going to do y'all first because, if y'all don't have anything to say, I have tons of questions to ask these people, but I think that the feedback we're going to get from the room is far more valuable. So throw up a hand. Anybody have a question about these topics before we get started? Oh, that is not the right one. Excuse me. Sorry, that's for later. Yes, would you mind taking him down? There we go. Thank you.
So a question for, so I'd love to chat with you over lunch, you know that I do. But just a general question, to tie it back to open source. I mean, do you get consultation requests related to source code, and are those ever tied to data, or are they just completely separate topics from data?
I'm digging deep for the best way to answer that. In the setting of this pilot, no. Although I was kind of thinking about your talk and where you see people's work and where we see people's work, we kind of see like the garage, the attic, like we're on a Zoom and it's as if someone has like pulled up a storage container and it's like all this stuff. I mean, virtual, but metaphorical stuff. So they're not really talking about open source really, but they are talking about their whole project, the landscape of the project, who's involved. A lot of conversations about who their collaborators are. So yeah, I would say not the nitty gritty to your main question, not the nitty gritty of source code, but how they're interacting with people and how the services that we're providing will enable or perhaps hinder those interactions.
I've had this come up twice, so not super often, but I asked them if they have along with their data GitHub repositories, and the answer is always yes. And then we talk about the ease of using Zenodo as a way to publish and archive their code through GitHub, and the ease of versioning and providing a citation and real metrics. And that, I think that piece is much easier than they anticipated, because it is really just a couple of clicks to integrate with Zenodo and publish code. But that makes me think a lot about your presentation and how these GitHub repositories are being archived and represented, and made available to the larger community.
Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I have talked to people a lot about formats, whether they have proprietary formats, but not so much the code itself.
Yes.
And we're talking about working data with data preservation or preserving the stuff in the first place. Obviously, you're not supposed to be putting PII in. The linguistic stuff seems like it could end up there. And the was that that campus cloud storage option, you know, it says very clearly on the IT webpage, like this should not be your only copy of this data. So how does that all work?
You're asking the hidden librarian question that we want to make clear to our researchers. This is not an archival copy because we cannot afford to put it in Merit right now. Eventually, we just need more money.
Anyone else? Yes.
They used to handle PHI and we would just anonymize it and then publish it. So it became open data with, you know, it could be doubly blind or it could be that you could trace it back. But I'm wondering if there's any change in relation to how it from the grant and contract level, like now that there's the federal contract information, like FCI requires a new level of diligence for data from the start. Kind of in cybersecurity, there's this thing, confidentiality, integrity, availability. It's the CIA triad. And the idea is, and this is surprisingly unknown to researchers. So I'm wondering, does that come up in terms of, sure, they may publish in terms of the integrity part, they may publish their data, but there may be pre-components of it that get lost that are necessary. I've seen that happen a lot. And so the stage and the pipeline and everything, and that could be the code, but it could also be some model that's created that is necessary. And then on the confidentiality side, they'll often say, well, I'm just going to publish this out in the open anyway. And so we ask, okay, would you want this out there before you publish it? And then they're like, oh, no, absolutely not. I would get snaked on my finding, this happens in astronomy or other fields. So does that come up in terms of all the work that goes in before the publication and also how to handle compliance requirements and the new federal landscape? Sorry, long question.
I mean, I can speak from specific experience, but this definitely relates to what I was saying about daily use limitations, institutional certification, and it's been really interesting. I'm doing a big job from, and so I've seen a lot of people just kind of throw out. They're just something. It's funny is that they like to add limitations, and we have to look and say this certificate does not impose limitations. It tells us what limitations exist. But for instance, the consent forms before a certain date didn't have language, have the possibility. So we do treat those differently, and that's one thing we have to correct is when CIRM is established, if it's different regulations, limitations. Again, this just speaks to what like you said, and it's something that's like I said, we're not a repository. The repositories are going to have their own checks for is this data shareable, and I'm actually dealing with this just came out about bulk data and sharing with foreign countries and stuff. For the most part, these are general data of, I think it's 100 people, so it's really challenging, and doing our best doesn't mean that someone can't go publish data they're supposed to publish, or say I want to swim deeply enough and actually they can share certain stuff but not others. Maybe it's tough. I hope I answered your question. It was really specific to my
So I just want to speak about the data that I've seen in GitHub specifically, because that's what I've been looking at. And I see a lot of lack of awareness of all of these things that you're mentioning. I think a lot of students or practitioners or anyone, they just sometimes use GitHub as their own storage. They're using it as if it's Google Drive. They're putting their code, their data, everything. And I don't think there's this awareness of the fact that it's publicly available for everyone to see, and also the fact that it doesn't have a license, which a lot of them don't put a license on these things, makes it there's no regulations over what people can do or not with these data or this code. So I do see a challenge of the awareness of the publishing of the data. That's the only thing I can speak of what I've seen. I don't have a solution.
I'll add one more thing without going off on a tangent. We, as part of this pilot, we were close touch with our information security office, and all of the campus provided storage areas have gone through really rigorous review, and we have documentation on like protection level, what level data can go in what place. And in the best circumstances, someone catch that at the very beginning, right when they request the data storage. Do they have a data use agreement? Is there PII in the data? And then we want to talk to them about like the best place to be storing that. Now, because this is like a UC thing, we did get some comments on not trusting campus provided storage solutions because of the security patches that are installed on university provided machines and the potential erosion and mistrust of academic freedom at the university level and not wanting to lose or compromise that. On the flip side, we have these storage solutions that are very secure and have been tested for that and have gone through the certification process. And so there are faculty who simultaneously don't trust and are thinking about the erosion of academic freedom. And on the information security office side, they're really thinking about security of patient data, IP, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of conflicting ideas around how we should be using secure storage. That's all I'll say about that.
We've got one in the back.
So I'm very struck by the fact that Juanita first spoke about code, and she looked only at GitHub, which is external to the university. So everything was put intentionally outside on a third-party platform. And then we heard about keeping data sort of within the university, right? Which is a different approach and mostly applied to data as opposed to mostly applied to code. And then we have sponsors that are worried about sort of having it properly labeled and properly kept in the right way. Whereas Juanita said, well, nobody puts any meta files on anything, like it's never there. And so it strikes me as very different messages across the different people that spoke for different classes of, I don't know, data code artifacts that people produce. And I'm not sure my exact question here, but I guess I'm trying to tease apart, why are we seeing such different behaviors for different artifacts that are getting produced? And is there some, like, do you have thoughts on why that might be true from what you've seen of what people want to do?
That's really interesting, and data science, open science capacity back into this biology specific capacity. I was struck by what Renea was saying about the lack of codes of conduct and licenses, and that's good. We've gotten that message out there, but to me, it's the same effort. Right? It's to think about when someone creates a GitHub repository, put in a blank license file. It should think about it, and it comes from things like having good templates and stuff. And so I think it's actually kind of the same effort of encouraging people to set up a project to have the right information capture in place. And that's going to look different for different types of, whether it's code, whether it's data, what type of data it is. But yeah, I think it's kind of all on the same spectrum. And I do think that it's something where funders are doing, because we say, okay, you started this project, you're going to do it correctly. And I really loved that first keynote too, because he was talking about that post-program training. That was great. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I see this all same workflow. And just like if you think of a workflow as linear or cyclical or whatever, just like a lot of noise along the way. And within that, maybe if you could think about the stuff you're looking at the beginning, the current flow of research, the active part, that because it's ongoing, yeah, maybe people didn't start off the right way, but there's a bit of that, there's activity in the moment. seeing people off, a lot of the conversations have been people at the tail end of careers who are trying to decide where to put all of this stuff because they're going to retire. So it's sort of a different moment of messiness. And yeah, going back, I think the ideal thing to your presentation, that this would have been worked out decades ago, if not, months ago. So a bit of just messiness in the research workflow overall, not necessarily in conflict with one another. I don't think so much about keeping work within the university. It's more just like assisting people to not sort of stray and have these random buckets and random accounts that they've forgotten about, and also just to help people work through the messiness of their collaborations. I think this probably comes up with GitHub as well, institutional GitHub. We have people who are working with the university and trying to figure out how their collaborators can access the work that they're doing. So some of the services we're offering require you all to be internal to Berkeley or all to be internal to UC. And then some need to account for the fact that you're going to have people all over with different levels of access needs, which GitHub maybe allows for better in the active period than some of the things we're offering. But yeah, I take your point, but it feels sort of like the normal happy messiness, I guess, that that exists in a workflow.
Yeah, I think it's to me it feels like different audiences, like different stages of the process. I think a lot of the things that I've seen in GitHub are maybe ideas that are in progress that students are working on, even things that are not even relevant long term and that are just kind of forgotten. Students just put their like class code there and they just leave it there. They don't archive the repositories or anything. They just live there. They haven't been touched in 10 years, but they still live there. Whereas I feel like there's a point you have developed a product and you've collected some data that you care about, and then you are like actually thinking about where can this live long term. GitHub is not the place for that. Like ever, you don't want your data to live in GitHub. It doesn't even support like long data sets. If you have a larger than like 1 gigabyte, you can't put it on GitHub. So that feels like different stages of the process. I was going to say something else and I forgot. Okay, no, never mind. Yeah, different stages of the process. And so something about the university have an institutional GitHub. And I feel like that would be really cool. It seems hard to make it happen, but part of the problem of the lack of practices and the lack of like awareness of all of these things is that the work is very decentralized. Each university group, like each research group, each research lab, even like each student has their own GitHub account where they put their own stuff, and there is no sort of like organization, like a centrality of all of these projects. So like issue templates are not even like a thing, right? Because there's no like a central piece of information that you can use for all of the universities. That would be like an ideal solution, but I don't see it happening. And I feel like it is kind of like the beauty of doing research in like decentralized ways still. Like I wouldn't imagine students kind of like wanting to put something under an organization until it's like a final product, right? Like the GitHub workflow is more like I have an idea, I write a code, then I modify it, then I modify it again, right? And that's kind of like decentralized, I guess, for a reason. But it would be a cool solution to have maybe some of those end products within like an official organization that is part of the university.
If you'll get the agenda back, I'll get it. Whoever gets the mic first.
Just to follow up on your comments. So UCLA, we did work enterprise GitHub, and I was part of that team. And it had a lot of benefits, but it also had all of the caveats that you point out in terms of the distributed organizations. Like that's the tendency that is GitHub allows for, it's /UCLA or /UCLA library or however it works. The benefit though, that we had where we have grad students who accidentally RM-RF'd several years of their work, including on their research group server, because they didn't know how to use GitHub. And, Linus Torvalds designed that himself with the idea that it's replicated everywhere, even if they had a copy. So it requires them teaching them how to use that. Some students are just amazing. They figured it all out. They use it every day. Their little graph looks all green, but it's surprising that we haven't, like UCOP is trying to figure out how to roll out GitHub as well. It is surprising that we don't have at least a lessons learned across that. I don't know if any other campus has it. And we have a bunch of GitLab. So NASA used to claim that you had to have your code on site. So we had all the NASA labs had their own GitLabs, which were constantly getting compromised because GitLab is just a big code that there's naturally vulnerabilities in. So that wasn't the greatest idea either. And there's other alternatives, but it'd be great if this was something that could be discussed and for various reasons. Like UCOP is actually trying to use GitHub to do GitHub Actions-based review of code or for security. There's just lots of things like that are so adjacent to everything that we're talking about. It's like enlarges the scope dramatically.
You mentioned that so many of the people that have come to you are near retirement, which to me raises like a second order question here, which is, okay, they've put their stuff somewhere. That's great. But potentially they've put it across these 5 storage solutions and then they leave. And then the kind of map that was in their head of how all these things relate to the GitHub repo potentially is lost. And I'm curious how you see the work you're doing and the work the rest of the folks at the panel are doing, kind of bridging into that next question of how do we not lose the institutional knowledge that you need to make that data actionable for the next researcher in 10 years who wants to get back to it.
I think we should add that when we say data, we just mean like digital detritus. So what people need to store isn't always like super relevant necessarily. All the campuses have a process for acquiring faculty papers that goes back from paper times. And the digital version of that doesn't always, I don't know, equate like emails and stuff. It's not quite the same in terms of like what faculty papers used to be and what you give to your university archive. But the people are talking, it's very based, so they have certain things that they want to preserve. A grant funded project funding. In one case, these amazing kite photographs of the Bay Area over 20 years that are on a hard drive at his social club to prevent them from being part of any kind of wildfire damage in the hills where he lives. So it's some pretty interesting stuff, but I would say sort of consigned to certain projects. And I think like less interest on it after the fact and more just like encapsulating these small projects that were part of their career. Does that align with?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Sam just said. And for some of the folks who aren't retiring or near retirement, we do talk to them about data ownership and overall management and certain tools that they can be using to ensure that there isn't data loss as graduate students leave their lab. One of the things that we haven't talked about that is kind of the next phase for this project is that we have a lot of for quite a few of them, we have their grant ID number so that we can dig back into the data management plan and see what from the data management plan aligns with their storage needs, if anything at all. and some kind of through lines that we can start drawing from their initial thought about how they thought the data was going to be organized over the course of the project to like where it's actually being published and shared potentially years later. So that's kind of like a phase 2, hopefully when we have time, when like the data curator starts and we can really dig more into this. But I think there's still a lot that we can learn about data movement and data storage and preservation from this pilot project.
Yeah, I just think we also have to focus on different data types and different storage access. So for instance, in person experience, I guarantee you the person today was microscope probably. Right? Okay, yeah, okay, so it's imaging. Story. So if I just accepted that's crazy, it's not gonna work. So it's the analysis. It's just a lot of here. So there's itself holding all our data because to keep it while you're working. There's also this plan from to be there for save data. It's useful to other researchers. So yeah, just lots of that's why there's so many approaches. It's great.
Just want to say that sometimes it doesn't make sense to start documentation. I'm sad about like seeing like descriptions, guides, and I feel like if you date like your code some text that explains how to use it, to use it, like how does it work, start. And I think for like instructions, so they're also different. So I feel like extra piece of you're doing.
I like that approach. I've been working with this and a slightly different version of this problem. All of our systems are geared for the amount of data that humans produce. And all of our systems churn that amount of data quite well. But we're now generating just gobs of sometimes useful, but sometimes useless data. So we're both now having to store it and figure out a way to process it. And we don't quite have the tools to sort through the amount of stuff we are now able to produce quickly and with limited results. I've heard a lot of people talk about training, about like there has to be a new baseline level for what onboarding a particular type of faculty member or staff now looks like. It used to be you had to take your sexual orientation training, and then you had to take the harassment training, and then you had to take the how to use the various tools we use. Does the university need to come up with new policies, new procedures, and new training for onboarding about how we all now have to deal with data? And does that feel like something that needs to happen at a fairly high level? Would that be helpful or impactful?
I think also about students. Because you talk about like faculty, like, should start at a student. Should have them like grad student. I think there's a lot of things that I need to see could find, but on data storage, on project, like things should start from like courses on computer science, data science. Scientist is going to have to code and get some data and do some analysis, and that means that we have to find tools. And I from like student see some of the things that I showed on my graphs. I'm not going to talk about faculty.
I think we've got time for one more. If anybody had a pressing question they've got. So, if not, we'll thank our panelists for the amazing job they did today and their excellent presentation.